Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today we have another interview with one of our team member, and he is Manuel. Hello.
Hi, Stefano. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay. Let's start with a very quick question, a quick introduction of yourself and your main area of interest in WildFly.
Okay. So as I said, my name is Manuel, and I'm a software engineer at Red Hat. I joined the Narayana team nearly 2 years ago now, and my team takes care of the transaction manager used in WildFly. This transaction manager is actually used also in other open source projects, like Quarkus, and it can be used in standalone mode when developers want to use a transaction service without the overhead of a runtime, like WildFly or Quarkus. So yeah, my main area of expertise in our community is distributed systems, and in particular, distributed transactions. What else? Well, lately I have become interested in distributed transaction in the cloud, as this ephemeral nature, the ephemeral nature of this environment opens up to new interesting challenges for us. So basically, in a nutshell, this is pretty much what I do in our community.
Okay, great. And so you already mentioned a bit about, in general, your engagement with community, but may I ask you if you remember also your first pull request or your first commit for an open source project?
Yes, I think I remember my first commit, but let me speak about my engagement with the community first. So being part of communities is my first goal. And I think whenever I develop a piece of code, I fix a bug or write a blog post, my target is to help the project and its community, of course, to become stronger and bigger. Communities are really a core element in open source. And in my opinion, of course, it is impossible to have open source without communities. And I want to stress that I talk about communities and not just a single community. The collaboration and integration of different communities makes open source what it is. For example, it happens very often that Narayana's new features are driven by other communities' needs. In the last few months, I have been analyzing how to use Narayana in a cloud environment. And that is because the WildFly community requires a transaction manager able to work smoothly with different cloud providers. So basically, the innovation that always drives the WildFly community moved Narayana to try to apply distributed transaction in a new environment. This is what basically I mean when I talk about the collaboration between different communities. The need of a community can easily become the innovation of another community. And this dynamic is only possible thanks to the open collaboration between different communities. And that is one of the things that I love the most about open source. And now, yes, my first pull request, yes. My first pull request was in the Narayana project. I changed the way that Archilen was employed in our test suite. And wow, that PR took me a long time. I had to first understand what Archilen was really, and then completely change the way that it was employed in Narayana. But although it was a complicated first PR, I had loads of fun with it. I learned how to use Archilen and how the test suite in Narayana works. So yeah, it was a very great first pull request.
Yes, great. You already gave a great insight of what open source is. I like very much your idea about communities and stressing about communities instead of community. So this drives me to the next question. And what is open source for you? Why you love it? And why you think it's still relevant? Years passed, a lot of years passed from the first open source project or the most famous one, kernel, Linux kernel. But yes, now I think open source is still relevant, but I'm very curious of your opinion on that.
Well, yes, I think that it's still relevant nowadays. Well, open source software is probably one of the best things that's happened in the history of computer science. I strongly believe that human knowledge can only expand when people share their knowledge and collaborate with each other. In computer science, the only real way to share knowledge is basically through sharing the code. As I said before, communities are what makes this possible. And communities are what I love the most about open source. Without a community, open source cannot happen. And from my point of view, this concept is embedded in the word project. The word project makes me think that there is an ongoing effort of a community to develop and maintain the code base. So let's put it like this. To me, open source software is a very successful expression of democracy and freedom. So let me think. Other features that make open source cool for me are possibly its flexibility to adapt to new technologies, thanks to many different experts that contribute to our communities, and how reliable open source is. And that is because it gets reviewed and used by thousands of people. And then I would say that open source adapts to people's needs. And that is because it's developed with the input of many users. So yeah, I think those are the reasons why I love open source. And yeah, I think open source is still relevant, right? Is still relevant. And open source actually is gaining more and more popularity and relevance these days. The combination of social platforms, the internet, and cloud computing is the perfect environment for open source. In fact, on one hand, collaboration and knowledge sharing are very easy and quick to achieve, thanks to platforms like GitLab or GitHub. And on the other hand, cloud providers are making profit renting resources rather than selling software. So software is not the main source of income in this technology. And also, it is convenient for users and developers to use software across different cloud platforms. So I think that in this scenario, the non-free software cannot compete with open source software. In fact, non-free software is closed by definition, and this does not work very well across different cloud providers. In my opinion, to expand cloud computing, software needs to be reliable, flexible, innovative, and as I said, open. These are all features that define open source software. So yeah, I think that open source is still relevant these days.
Wow, what an answer. After that, I'm sure many people fallen in love for open source, if any wasn't yet. So let's consider that at least one person fallen in love for open source, and put yourself in his shoes, his or her shoes, for being a first-time contributor. What would you suggest him or her?
Well, yes. From my experience, I will tell you what they shouldn't do. And this is, do not feel discouraged if you struggle to undertake big issues, bugs, or improvements. Open source communities welcome all kinds of contributions, even small-scale PRs or other form of contributions. For example, improving the documentation or blogging about the project. Basically, all contributions are meaningful and they will improve the project. Unfortunately, it took me a while to understand that. When I was a teenager, I was so excited about the open source world and Linux in particular. And so I tried to contribute to Linux, but as soon as I started reading the code, I realized it was too complicated for me. And I thought, wow, whoever contributes to Linux must be a genius. Well, yes, there are actually very smart people contributing to the Linux kernel. But I have also realized that it takes a long time to understand big projects. And probably the most important thing that I have realized is that there is no open source project that will not welcome contributions from users. Even in a project as big as the Linux kernel, newcomers can always find a ticket to start from. So again, my suggestion here for newcomers is do not make my same mistake. Get engaged with the project and start tackling small-scale PRs. Working on this kind of PRs will expand your understanding of the project, and you will gradually learn how to contribute to more complicated issues. So, of course, I would also suggest newcomers to read the documentation and try to have a look at old threads or blog posts. You might find your answer there. So, basically, in a nutshell, build up your knowledge and take your time. No rush at all. And of course, the community is always there to help.
Yeah, it makes sense, all of that. And so, on the same path, so for newcomers or even for more expert community members, do you have anything that you would like to get feedback from the community, or anything new that you would suggest them to give a try?
Okay, yes, my current focus is on Kubernetes and cloud platforms. In particular, I'm trying to smooth out how Narayana works on the cloud. So if anyone wants to know more about this, or even better, give that contribution, there are a couple of ongoing conversations in the Narayana group. I also posted a blog about the challenges we are currently facing. So please, if you are interested, have a look at those and let us know what you think.
Do you have any pet project?
Well, yes, I have a project. Well, a couple of projects actually. I am refurbishing a couple of pieces of furniture. I really like to learn practical skills as well as theoretical skills. For example, recently I started learning woodworking techniques, and I have just finished a shelving system for our pantry. And I used all the wood joints. And I can tell you it was a great feeling to complete this shelving system. And now every time I take something out of my pantry, I feel very proud of my little projects.
Yeah, and well, your favorite book?
Um, well, about my favorite book, there are many books that I really like. But if I had to pick one, I would go for a book that really impressed me when I was a teenager, and it's Orwell's 1984. And then last book I read was for work, and it's Java transaction processing. And this is a really nice book. Of course, I'm really biased here, but this is a really nice book that gives you an overview of how transactions are processed and also integrated in the Java world. And actually, I'm reading at the moment this very interesting book. It's called Open Source. Open sources maybe voices from the open source revolution. And I was interested in reading more about the history of open source and the philosophy behind it. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all.
Yeah, great. And well, hobbies. I see there a do-it-yourself book.
Well, yes, I already spoke about woodworking and DIY, but when I'm not busy messing up my living room, I really enjoy hiking and camping. Basically, since I moved to the UK, I discovered that this country has some amazing sites, natural sites, and it is a great place for outdoor activities. And the reason why I like outdoor activities is really simple. I love to spend time in nature. It really helps to empty my mind, and it's also a great way to meet very nice people.
Yeah, great way for sure. Well, I think that's all. I don't have anything else to ask you. So thank you so much for your time and for the nice interview and great answers. So,
Oh, thank you very much, Stefano. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share my work and my ideas with the community. Well, I guess I'll see you around then.
yeah, and don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel. Link is in the description. And thank you for watching.